Recently, the List team have allowed the use of the Click Between Frames mod for top level play within the game after 80% of the top players surveyed stated that it should be permitted. In this video, I'm going to discuss why I think this is a terrible decision, and I feel like I have a fairly unique take on this because I haven't really seen many people use some of the arguments that I use. So before we get into this, obviously don't send hate to the List mods or anyone who thinks CBF should be allowed, or anyone who doesn't think it should be allowed for that matter. This video is simply a criticism of their decision. In Geometry Dash 2.2, the game runs on 240 TPS, which basically means there are 240 frame steps in which you can have your click register. This means that if you click in the middle of two physics steps, your input will not be registered until the next physics step, meaning there's up to a 4.2 milliseconds of delay from when you click to when your click registers. This seems like not a lot, and for like 99.9% of players this doesn't matter at all, and they won't even notice this while playing. But at the top level, where jumps can be frame perfect on 120 FPS and have windows of less than 9 milliseconds, all the precision possible matters. This is where Click Between Frames comes in. The mod extends the game's physics step system to use the polling rate of your input device as the number of frame steps, which means that your inputs are registered far more precisely and accurately. Now, obviously I agree that this mod gives you an advantage, that's why people want it allowed, but here's why I think it shouldn't be. The main reason I believe this mod should be considered cheating is because it's an external tool that's not part of the base game's physics. The game is not intended to be played this way, so any completion that uses the mod isn't really a legitimate one in my eyes. Obviously, if this was integrated into the base game, I'd entirely support that, but as it stands, with the mod being an entirely external tool that provides an advantage, I would deem it cheating, in the same way as modifying hitboxes or using noclip is cheating. RobTop acknowledges this, and does not rate levels verified using the mod, at least that's what he's stated, so evidently he agrees that it should not be acceptable to modify the game's physics in this way. I also think it seems a bit disrespectful to Rob to use this mod, in the same way that I felt using a 2.2 private server before the update released was, but I can understand people disagreeing with me on that. One argument I've heard from advocates of the mod is that this is essentially a repeat of the situation several years ago on whether to allow FPS bypass into the game. Now, while these are both external tools that modify the base game's physics, the difference in my eyes is that FPS bypass only existed to replicate a physics advantage that was possible in the base game to players who couldn't afford a high frame rate monitor. However, Click Between Frames introduces a completely new advantage to players that isn't achievable in any way in vanilla GD, and that makes it cheating for me. While I understand the List team's decision to allow the mod based on the huge public support for it, in my opinion this represents a huge lack of care for the integrity of playing the game. I view this in the same way as the Minecraft speedrunning moderators allowing the calculator a few years ago. They're both external tools that provide an advantage to players and remove an aspect of skill from the game simply for the sake of convenience and making the game easier. When I speedrun Minecraft, I do use a calculator because it's really the only way to have a chance at competing at a decent level. And in the same way, I think the Click Between Frames mod will become almost ubiquitous at a top level, which in my opinion is a bad thing since I view it as cheating. Many people would argue that people using this mod isn't a problem, we should all play how we want and it is a game after all. However, I don't care if people use the mod, my problem lies with the Demon List allowing it for list records. It's no secret that the Demon List has an incredibly high amount of influence over the community, I would argue on par with RobTop himself. So, by allowing the mod, the Demon List is essentially advertising the use of external tools as acceptable and even encouraged to perform at the top level. I just don't see this as positive because, as I said, I think intentionally making the game easier in a way that changes the way the game fundamentally works is against the spirit of competitive play. You might disagree, and that's fine, but I hope you can at least see my perspective. I sort of view it as lazy from the people who voted for Click Between Frames to be allowed. It's almost as though they don't want to try and improve legitimately, so use a mod to make it easier and gain an advantage over those who don't use it. I've heard it said that this is how Geometry Dash was supposed to be, that is, having entirely accurate clicks. But no, it's just how you want it to be. How is that any different from the Demon List hypothetically allowing speed hacking to 0.9 times speed because people feel like that's how the game should have always been? A large amount of top players have remained on 2.1 GDPSs after the 2.2 update to gain the significant advantage afforded by the 2.1 physics. So one thing that is good about the Click Between Frames mod is that it encourages people to play on the most recent version of the game. However, CBF provides an advantage over even the 2.1 physics, which makes it even more insane to me that it's allowed. If it were less, well, good for want of a better word, than the base 2.1 physics, I feel it would be more inclined to accept the permission of the mod, because it would serve more to improve the experience of playing on 2.2. For example, although I didn't use it myself, I wasn't against physics bypass being allowed, because that was the purpose of that hack, to give people the 2.1 physics experience on 2.2. The Demon List also stated that since RobTop has said that he won't be rating CBF verifications, that they may start placing unrated levels. Now, the Demon List has always placed only levels that are star rated, and there's a reason for this. A rating acts as a sort of quality control for levels, so that the list isn't filled with unnamed layouts or piles of garbage that have had no effort put into their decoration or gameplay. This at least means that there is some standard for the top levels. If unrated levels are placed, then this is completely gone. Many people have criticised levels being made specifically for the Demon List and difficulty for attention, and allowing unrated levels onto the list will likely just encourage this even further, since creators will have less motivation to create high quality levels for the list. Obviously, most of the levels currently on the list are not very high quality, so imagine how bad they'd be if they didn't even have to be rated to be placed. I've always thought that the hardest levels should look good, because they're levels that everyone looks up to and aspires to beat. They represent the community in a way that is fairly unique. I am intentionally overreacting a little here. I expect that if the Demon List did allow unrated levels, they'd have a quality control of their own, but there's something about the developer of the game recognizing a level that really makes the list feel more legitimate. The Demon List has allowed the use of some hacks or game alterations for years now, but they've always been really picky about which are allowed in order to stop players gaining a large advantage over vanilla players, and I think that's great. Even hacks like Force Don't Fade, which disables some small effects for objects entering and leaving the screen, is banned, suggesting the list moderators believe it gives an unfair advantage. But a mod like Click Between Frames provides a much larger competitive advantage than this, and yet it's still allowed? Another example, you may remember the Demon List briefly banning the Show Hitboxes on Death hack a few years back. This received backlash because it seemed an arbitrary rule change. The hack only gave a large advantage in a very few specific situations and was more of a quality of life tool than most others. The reason I bring this up is because it's an example of the List team attempting to promote fair play in the community, and this is why it actually shocked me a little to see that they unbanned the use of CBF. I don't know whether they gave in to community pressure or if the majority of the List team actually was in favour of the change, but either way, this seems to be the new normal for what is allowed. I'm not a vanilla player. I have Geode and Megahack installed, but I only really use quality of life hacks such as CPS counter or start position switcher or, GD-DL integration, stuff like that. I'm even against the use of icon hack because I think it removes an element of progression and fun from the game. So while I'm not against the use of mods, I am strongly opposed to this kind of hack, like Click Between Frames. Anyway, that's me done. To sum up my main arguments as to why I don't like the decision to allow this mod. 1. It makes no sense to me to allow an alteration to the game's physics that is not and has never been achievable in the base game. 2. It may lead to other such changes in the future and therefore undermines the integrity of the Demon List and the game competitively as a whole. 3. It isn't approved by RobTop, so obviously shouldn't be seen as legitimate. I'm going to continue to not use this mod because I think it should be considered cheating, unless of course Rob adds it into the game officially, then all this drama will have been for nothing and we can all party and celebrate. I'd also like to mention the GD World Tournament because they actually stuck to the decision to keep CBF banned despite the list allowing it, which I think is great, especially in a tournament where there might be money on the line, because it seems to hold respect for the developer and the game the way it's meant to be played. But if you made it this far, like the video, comment and subscribe. See you next time.